Good morning. Today we're going to continue our unit on agriculture by talking a bit about food justice. Now, we've already talked about food security, which is the idea that people have access to enough food to live and be healthy. And that can feel like a really abstract concept because who is making sure people are food secure? So I think it's important to talk about the people behind those movements. And we're going to talk today about one of those people. Her name is LaDonna Redmond. She's done a lot of important on-the-ground work to create food justice, and we're also going to talk about what food justice means. When we're talking about food security and bringing food to people who may not have enough to be healthy and live, and therefore we need to create more of a food justice system, I think it's important to know that this is something that food justice is something everyone can be involved in. You can volunteer at a soup kitchen. You can donate food to a family you know that doesn't have enough. You can start a garden in your community so that you can grow food for people in need. And we're going to talk more about what LaDonna Redmond did in her community. But ultimately, she is a hero because of her work in the community. It started with her son. She wanted fresh food for her son. And from there, she moved to her broader community and helping to feed other people like her son. When you listen to her speak about how she got involved in food justice, she says, "I wanted to get the healthiest food that I could for my son. I wanted food that was free from genetically modified organisms. I wanted food that was free from pesticides. I wanted food basically that was grown healthy, organically, but that food was not available in my neighborhood on the west side of Chicago." So we're going to talk more about what she did to address these issues. But I think it's important to know that heroes are just everyday people who are addressing problems they see in the community. And anyone is able to participate in that kind of movement. So let's back up a minute to what food justice is, because we still haven't talked about that quite yet. When we're talking about justice, there's often a problem. There's an injustice we're trying to fix. So the problem when we're talking about food justice is that people aren't able to access the food they need. And LaDonna Redmond found that in her community, she could get a gun faster than a tomato. And I'm using a lot of her words because she has a lot of powerful TED Talks and speeches out there, and I think it's important to use her words when talking about her work. But she said, "In my neighborhood, I can buy designer gym shoes, every kind of junk food, all kinds of malt liquor, illegal drugs, or maybe even a semi-automatic weapon, but I cannot purchase an organic tomato." And she saw this as a huge problem, especially when we'll talk about, her son needed that kind of healthy food. She wasn't able to access it. So food justice is just the right for people to grow, sell, and eat healthy food. To go a little more in depth into the definition of food justice, it's not just healthy food, but it's food that's community driven. It's chosen and created by the people who live in a community. It's accessible and humanely and locally grown. So this is food that's not exploiting other communities, and it's affordable. It's sustainable for people in the land, meaning that not only is it affordable to those who need to buy it, but we're not leaving, our environment in an unsustainable place for the future. So getting back to LaDonna's story and why she's a food justice hero, even before her work in food justice, she was really involved in her community from the beginning. After overcoming her own struggles with addiction, she created a woman's halfway house and saw a lot of the problems her community members faced in that role. And then when she had her own son, she was really faced with a lot of the harsh realities of her community. They became a lot more personal. She knew that Black men often faced a lot of racism in her community in Chicago. In her TED Talk, she describes how there's just this understanding in Chicago that these little accidents happen to men of color and young men of color as well, and no one really talks about it, but it was unsettling to her. And on top of that, her son was born with some severe food allergies that really forced her to eat a certain way, and this is what led her to realize how inaccessible that food was. In LaDonna's situation, I think the term food activist or just activist in general is really applicable because she was very active when she was faced with these issues with her son who had a need for food that she couldn't access. She didn't wait for other organizations to come solve the problem. She really acted on her own needs and started urban farms in the area and opened some farmers markets in her community to solve the injustice that she was seeing. She soon became a food justice activist, self-declared, and started an organization called the Campaign for Food Justice Now. And this organization, their goal is to apply issues of race, class, and gender to the food system so that we don't have such an unjust system. At the bottom there, I have a list of kind of awards and honors she's won. So she's really well recognized for her work as a food justice activist. So LaDonna Redmond was really a hero to the food justice movement because she changed the conversation in important ways. There's this great saying by Shirley Chisholm that says, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I think this really applies to LaDonna. Not only did she bring a folding chair for herself, she brought it for her whole community and really encouraged people to show up and make the change they wanted to see where they live. And even beyond that, her own community, she changed some really stereotypes and some common narratives about certain communities. She challenged the idea that a farmer cannot be a Black woman. She talks a lot about that in her TED Talks. This idea that people of color don't want to eat organic or don't care about it. She really brought that idea to the table and said, no, we just don't have access to it. And that is not our fault, but we're working to change it. And also that good food has to be expensive. They were producing food on little strips of land all throughout Chicago and doing it in a way that people could access. So she made an impact not just in her community, but in the broader community. So just to summarize, I think LaDonna Redmond is a hero for a lot of reasons. I think we can learn a lot from her. In particular, she was really fearless for both her son and her community. She saw a problem and knew she could fix it and wasn't afraid of speaking out. And she really made a voice for those who didn't have one before. She brought that folding chair to the table. And now more people are considering those conversations. And, you know, I think anyone who wants to better the place that they live should be a hero, which is why I think anyone really can be a hero, especially if they're making change for the people they love. So I hope you feel inspired by LaDonna Redmond as well.